You're watching Beyond Markets, and welcome. I'm Kenneth Igbomor, and today's show we'll discuss how Nigeria can improve its dairy value chain. You can join the conversations with the hashtag Beyond Markets, and you can follow my handle, that's at Kenneth Igbomor. Now, the Central Bank of Nigeria has committed to driving backward integration in the dairy value chain as it plans to add dairy products to its FX list. Muhammadu Abubakar, the National President of the Commercial Dairy Ranchers Association of Nigeria, and Tilewa Adebajo, the CEO of CFG Advisory, join me for this discussion. Thank you so much for joining me on the show, sirs. And I'd first like to start off with the fact that this is not the first time we're hearing of the government trying to have backward integration in this sector. You know, I'd like to get a sense of what happened in the previous attempts and what were the challenges they faced.
Yeah, I can't remember any attempt apart from what we've been attempting to put together in order to come up with a robust policy. I know as an association we've had meetings with Federal Ministry of Agriculture, and we've had similar meetings with the Federal Ministry of Trade and Investment, and the work is still ongoing. So if there was any attempt where a policy was drafted or even shared among stakeholders, I'm not aware of that.
All right, but then in the consultations that you've had so far with the players in the industry, what has been the key sticking points?
First, we look at the backward integration. We look at the tariff regime modification, and also to look at the HS code application. As you may be aware, there is zero tariff on import of agri implements, but it's hardly enforced because when you go to custom, you see that it's not in the HS code. So we're trying to see how we harmonize the HS code in order to make sure that when you import dairy products, it is going to enjoy this zero duty, which we are not yet enjoying.
All right, so let me bring in Tilewa in here. Looking at this backward integration, as an economist, I'd like to understand from your perspective, you know, the kind of impact this could have in the entire value chain for Nigeria.
Well, first of all, let's take a look at the existing business. There are few established players in the industry. I think a company that's been here for over 50 years, a listed company, and another one that are involved in mostly, and most of the milk that we use in this country is mostly powdered milk, and understand that also there's also the evaporated milk, which is sold in mostly tins and in sachets. The fresh milk industry is a different industry, which is very limited. Most of the milk that we bring in is UHT, or pasteurized ultra high temperature milk, which we sell in Tetra Pak packs. So the industry itself the product itself is already very heavily import dependent. And in terms of taking a look at how you want to do is what we call the import substitution industrialization strategy that Nigeria has been trying to accomplish over the last 40 years. And quite frankly, all we've been saying is that there are certain things that if we have the local competence and the ability to produce locally, then we should be able to start by importing and then substitute with local production. This hasn't worked in the dairy industry at all, and as I mentioned earlier, there is no defined policy in the dairy industry to be able to work out backward integration that is defined. And the only sector that I think we've actually achieved some success in this is actually the cement industry, where cement was imported in raw form. Then there was a ban on importing, just raw cement. You had to have a bagging plant before you did that. And from having a bagging plant, you had to set up the actual industry. And this took over a 10-year period for us to be able to successfully integrate it. I think it was under the presidency of Obasanjo that he came up aggressively with pushing this policy through. Okay. So that's really where we have the challenge in terms of we have a policy, we have an import substitution strategy as a policy, but the implementation, unfortunately, has not been very effective.
All right, then, talking about implementation, I'm going to piggyback on what Tilewa just said about the cement industry. We've seen clearly a backward integration strategy from government that is working. Is it a case of can we copy and paste that into the into the dairy industry, as someone who plays in that industry, where do you think some of the challenges will come in, and how best do you think we can implement this backward integration policy?
It's quite easy for us to cut and paste, but we have to agree that this is a completely different industry that has a
so what are
raw
the
material that's
peculiarities
perishable. So we need to understand that we have upstream in dairy, we have midstream, we have the downstream. The downstream is where you have 99% players, where we have the multinationals. Upstream is where you have the producers, where you have the pastoralists, where you have the commercial dairy farmers that produce the raw milk. And then the midstream is where you have the linkage. That is the whole chain infrastructure. It's where it plays important role here. This is where you have the milk collection, you have the milk evacuation, and you have the milk delivery to the processors. I can tell you in Nigeria today, there's a zero investment in the midstream. If there is zero investment in this midstream, there's no way you will link the upstream with the downstream. What is happening is, instead of having the upstream in Nigeria working, then we have to look at the upstream in other countries that produce this powdered milk, and then we bring it directly to the downstream in Nigeria, bypassing the midstream, because it has nothing to do in this instance. So some of these strategies applied by CBN, I think, is to make sure they bring the midstream into play. Once they become a major actor, then the linkage between the upstream and downstream will be complete. And all the government had been trying to do over the years, for the last 60 years, is to see how they scale up the upstream. They will say, how do we now get a 50-liter producing cow? How do we improve the cattle to a Frisian or Jersey cattle? But what I'm saying is, we have examples in other East African countries like Kenya, Tanzania, and other countries. All they needed to do, and even India, for instance, all you need to do is to harness even the 1 liter produced by your cows and get it to the processors. Then when you see that you cannot have enough, then you now look at the strategy of improving your own breed of cattle. And in fact, it doesn't need government intervention. How many workshops have been organized for MTN to invest in Nigeria? All you need is provide the market. And some of these strategies by CBN and some policies that we have been advocating for is to provide this incentive. And once that is in place, it's automatic. Upgrading your cattle from 1 liter to 5 liters does not need anybody to tell you. Once you know, you'll make money.
All right, then we'll get into the incentives a little, but I want to speak to Tilewa now. I'd like to first get into the area of investment. We have people who have invested in this sector, in this industry in Nigeria. You mentioned we have some listed companies that are already playing in this field for decades now. And then now you see a policy shock, or where the central bank is saying, okay, we're going to go this way going forward. You know, for people who are looking who have been investing in this in the country, you know, how best can you mitigate the shocks that the investors in this key sector of the market could face?
Well, I think one of the problems we have in this country is our economy. The reason why economy is going at 2% and we're not seeing the levels of foreign direct investments is the uncertainty in economic policy and direction. And this is one of them. If you're going to make an announcement of this nature that you are going to, overnight, you're going to take these companies, they haven't banned the product, by the way. No. They're just saying that these companies are no longer going to have access to the CBN window, and they'll have to source their foreign exchange from autonomous sources. So what this means is that the additional costs, they're going to pass it on to the consumers. And these are companies that are still dominant in the market with the products. So if you'd like to have a backward integration policy, then there's need to understand how to engage the stakeholders in that industry. If you provide the right incentives, then the incentives for investments are clear in Nigeria. It's just that we're not implementing them. What we need now are clear-cut policy directions to be able to drive the implementation of those policies, and those investment incentives will kick in. Pioneer status, zero equipment on duty, all these nice incentives are there, ability to repatriate your capital. We have the best incentives on table. That's on the issue. The issues are around policy consistency and implementation.
All right, do you share the same sentiment on incentives?
No, I don't think so. I think the best incentive for every businessman is market. As I'm talking to you today, there's no incentive for any investor to invest in local dairy production in Nigeria.
How do you mean? Can you clarify that?
Yeah, the market is when you produce raw milk, you should be able to sell at a competitive rate. Today, the cost of producing a liter of milk is about 300 naira to us. When you're importing a powdered milk, you reconstitute it into reconstituted powdered milk. It's just about 120 naira. So you can see the sharp difference. How can somebody in his right senses come and invest in this? So that's why we're talking about policy. One thing I agree with him is, yeah, there's need to come up with a robust policy for backward integration. Maybe import substitution program for over some years that will now bring all stakeholders. But when we're talking of stakeholders, it shouldn't be dominated by the importers. You have to bring in the local producers as well, hear them out, and let's see what is needed. It's easy for food just to be imported and be fed to us. It's very difficult to produce your own food to eat. But I assure you, that's the best way to go.
Okay, but let me bring in Tilewa into this, and then, because in fact, if I'll allow the two of you to comment on this point, because it has to do with the economics of it all, demand and supply. You know, first, what is the demand of the yearly demand for milk in Nigeria? Where are we at, you know, in meeting this demand? And, you know, how can we then ramp up to either surpass that demand so that we can either start benefiting from the dairy industry in Nigeria? Let me start with Tilewa.
Well, clearly what is happening is the fact that local production cannot meet up with the demand for the product locally. And I think if you remove the importation from it, you have a deficit of close to about 1 million, over 1 million, I think, tons of milk that you need to import. So there's clearly a deficit that even the local production today cannot meet the demand, which is always the challenge. So when you talk about it not being market-driven, you also have to take a look at your environment and the level of your infrastructure development. In an area of Nigeria, it's not an accident that we tend to use dry powdered milk, or we are using like evaporated milks in tins or in things so that it can keep. Because the technology that is required, which is refrigeration, to preserve this product, I think is very expensive because of the power situation. And in order to get it to the masses, it's a lot easier because the handling cost of all these things are quite high. So in other countries who have a very strong logistics network and infrastructure, the cost to deliver this product is quite cheap. But in Nigeria, we have that disadvantage because the cold chain technology and investment in the cold chain technology is very, very limited. So, you know, and the challenges that Mr. Abubakar goes through from bringing milk, fresh milk from his farm in Kano all the way to Lagos is a 12-hour drive. And he must have invested in refrigerated trucks to be able to distribute his products across the country. And that is his own investment. In other countries, there will be somebody else who will pick up the milk from him and do the distribution. So the cost of trying to produce this product in Nigeria, because of our level of infrastructural development, is quite high. So it's going to take us a bit of time to be able to get on track with full local production. So it requires a lot of commitment in implementation policy.
All right, so I'd like to get your take on this as well.
Yeah, I think he's misunderstanding two things, or mixing two things. There's difference between the perishable product itself and the evaporated and the powdered milk as the end product. We're talking about the raw material being used. You see, the same companies that are producing evaporated milk, producing powdered milk, can use the raw material from Nigeria. And once this is competitive, I don't even have to get involved in the value addition he's talking about.
All right, then I'll take a quick break right now. When we return, we'll continue the rest of the show Beyond Market. I've been speaking to Tilewa Adebajo, is the CEO of CFG Advisory, and also Muhammadu Abubakar is the National President of the Commercial Dairy Ranchers Association of Nigeria. If you're just joining us, Muhammadu Abubakar is the National President of the Commercial Dairy Ranchers Association of Nigeria, and Tilewa Adebajo, the CEO of CFG Advisory, are with me today, and we're discussing how Nigeria can improve its dairy value chain. All right then, so another very interesting angle this brings up is this question around jobs. When we go into a backward integration policy for the dairy sector, how will this impact jobs? I would like to get first from the economists and I also get from Mr. Abubakar. So Tilewa.
First of all, agriculture is the biggest sector contributor to the Nigerian economy, close to about 25% of our GDP. So it's pretty significant, and it's the largest employer of workforce. When you start to take a look at the value-added component of agriculture, then I think the contribution is much more significant. So maybe close to about 35% of our GDP. But clearly it's the largest employer of labor, and the potential is there. The dairy market in Nigeria, or the dairy business, is an established business over the years, and clearly there are people who have been employed in that area, and it's a major opportunity to create jobs. What we're talking about now is how you're now shifting production from established companies that have been in importation of these products to get them to start to manufacture the products locally. That is the story of Nigeria. That's what we've always been trying to do. We've set up Ajaokuta steel mill because we wanted to stop importing steel and to start producing steel locally. You see that tremendous amounts of money has been spent on that plant, and we have not succeeded. So in terms of the policy perspective, I would like to just maybe take a look at it from more of the macro perspective and say that it's a policy issue. So we've looked at steel, we've looked at so many things we want to do, textiles. We want to grow cotton and to be able to manufacture textiles locally, at least to a significant portion. So the challenge with this and other policies of trying to do our import substitution industrialization strategy is what is the problem. And if we're not careful, it could create jobs or destroy jobs the way we take a look at it. So it's a question of how that policy is implemented. But I think that there could always be a win-win situation.
Mr. Abubakar, your take on the jobs, and do you see this as do you think this will be a boom for jobs for the sector?
Yeah, of course, it's going to be a boom because I assure you that the jobs that is created by the processors will remain and will even increase. That's where you have our world spheres, and then but the ripple effect that is going to have on the upstream and the midstream is going to be enormous. And so you will see employment. I can't quote figures here, but I can tell you, given example of other countries that have successfully done this, we can comfortably say that we're going to have a boom in jobs creation. And in fact, it's one of the key tools of empowerment applied in India, applied in Sri Lanka, and even the multinational processors that are within this country. We know what they are doing in Morocco, for instance. We know what they are doing in Kenya. We know what they are doing in India. They are not applying the same strategy in this country because we just are import-dependent country. But I think once we start changing our strategy in terms of production, in terms of how we produce our things or how we source our raw materials, then I think they will start also to support us in making sure that we create jobs by getting the local raw materials from Nigeria.
All right then, but then another issue that has also come up on this is the issue of smuggling. We've seen, the government trying to be self-sufficient in different staples across the country, and we've seen rice, for example. We still hear about the incidents of smuggling happening across the borders in there. Then we signed up to the AFCFTA, and then I'd like to speak to the opportunity we'll see in there, but then Tilewa, I'd like you to speak on these two issues, one on the issue of smuggling, and then what it means, developing the value chain at the point where we are signing the FCFTA.
Well, a lot of all these things, again, smuggling means that you have a demand that you're not able to meet through local production. And if you're trying to produce something locally and you cannot meet the demand, people will find ways to import these products, pay the high cost, and also bring them to the markets. So it's important that you take a look at your markets very carefully. You also have to be able to control your borders in terms of the tariff regime. And if you take a look at the African Continental Free Trade Zone you're talking about, If other countries have a better cost of production than we do, then it's not everything that we're going to manufacture in Nigeria. You might find out that what is it costing you to import milk, as opposed to maybe it's not an area of your competitive strength. So those are the things that we need to do in terms of understanding our overall industrial policy. But if we do have the capacity, then by all means, then we need to make a concerted effort and a serious effort at developing the capacity of production within those local industries. And that is exactly where policy comes in place. So if we're not careful, as we've seen with the African Continental Free Trade Zone, a lot of countries are already focused on what they want to do and what they cannot do. And they know that there are certain things that they're not strong in, or they do not have the capacity. So they'll rather import their petroleum products because they don't have refining capacity. So there are many things that we need to look at in terms of the Nigerian policy on a holistic basis and decide where our competitive strengths are. And agriculture definitely is one of them.
So your take?
Yeah, I think the African Trade Agreement, we have our fears, and I think we've expressed it, and we would like to emphasize it again, that the rule of origin must be enforced, because we fear that if we're able to control on the inflow of, or the dumping of dairy products on Nigeria, they may find a way of getting it to other countries and then bring it in as a product of a sister African country. But just recently, a week ago, I was in Kenya. I was one of the delegates from Nigeria that went to look at the roadmap for continental dairy development, and we look at also the regional strategies that's going to be employed by ECOWAS and COMESA and other regional bodies like UMA for the Northern Africa. And I think we're very clear about making sure that we become self-sufficient in dairy in the African continent. I just hope Nigeria will not lag behind and then will end up being jokers.
Okay, finally, I think before we sign off on this one, I just first then like to get your recommendations. Tilewa first, you know, economically, what kind of recommendations you see, how we should take this, and then are we seeing this also, beyond the fears, are we seeing this as opportunities for collaboration between MDAs, between the private sectors and government? You know,
there's no clear cut about doubt about this. That what I would like to see is, you know, the central bank determines monetary policy. And I think it's also important that we don't see the central bank trying to take a lead in another sector, which is agriculture. The incentives that they're producing in terms of financing for equipment, I think it's great. But what is more important is that I'd like to see a more coordinated approach. I'd like to see the central bank sit down with the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investments to be able to formulate a policy around this program that can be sustainable and can deliver the benefits that we need to see. And I think that when I see that, then I think I become confident that it can work, because this is not something that you do in isolation. So apart from those ministries coming together, you also have to get involved the stakeholders on that industry, the local producers, and of course the current importers. And I think the good point that Mr. Abubakar made is the fact that what is the program in place where at least the importers are going to the local producers to harness all of the current local production to be able to do the existing products such as evaporated milk and powdered milk. I think that would be a low-hanging fruit. If we can achieve that very quickly, then I think that would be a great start. So that is my own recommendation.
All right, so your recommendation and opportunities for collaboration.
Yeah, I think, as I've said, the midstream is a great opportunity. There's no investment there, so it's beckoning for foreign direct investment and even local investment. And also, I would like to see collaboration between the multinationals and local producers. It's not a game of cat and mouse. It's supposed to be collaborative effort between the two to make sure that we support the government in self-sufficiency in dairy products in our country. This, I think, is what we should look at rather than getting afraid or jittery. And then we also look forward to a robust policy on dairy development in the country, and we would like all stakeholders to come. Let's exchange our fears and also opportunities that we see in our own collaboration. So I think it's a good thing, and we hope the CBN has started it, so others should follow.
I've been speaking to Muhammadu Abubakar. He's the National President of the Commercial Dairy Ranchers Association of Nigeria, and also Tilewa Adebajo, the CEO of CFG Advisory. And we've been looking at how to improve the dairy value chain in Nigeria. And that's it on Beyond Markets, and thank you so much for being a part of the show. You can watch the show at 5 p.m. West African time daily and have access to all previous episodes of the show on our website, and that's at cnbcafrica.com. You can also stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Markets and follow me at Kenneth Igbomor. Do have a wonderful day.